As I walked along the creek that sunny afternoon, I had no idea my life was about to change forever. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how a moment of curiosity spiraled into the biggest mistake of my life. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. I often took walks here to clear my head, but today something caught my eye, a beautiful chestnut horse grazing in a nearby pasture. Its coat gleamed in the sunlight, and I found myself drawn towards the fence. As I approached, the horse lifted its head and looked at me with gentle, intelligent eyes. There was something so calm and inviting about its gaze that I couldn't resist getting closer. Without really thinking it through, I climbed over the wooden fence, my shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth on the other side. The horse didn't shy away as I walked up to it. Instead, it stood perfectly still, as if waiting for me. I reached out my hand, marveling at how soft its coat felt beneath my fingers. I'd never been this close to a horse before, and I was struck by its size and strength. Yet despite its powerful build, there was a gentleness to it that put me at ease. As I ran my hand along its side, the horse seemed to enjoy the attention. Its ears were relaxed, and it let out a soft snort that I took as a sign of contentment. Emboldened by its calm demeanor, I decided to explore further. My hand moved lower, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Hanging between the horse's back legs was what I assumed to be its genitals. I know it sounds naive now, but at the time I didn't know much about horse anatomy. Curiosity got the better of me, and before I could talk myself out of it, I reached out to touch it. The texture surprised me. It was softer than I expected on the outside, but I could feel something firm beneath the surface. As I continued to explore with my fingers, I noticed it starting to change. The firmness I felt began to grow and extend. I was fascinated. I'd never seen anything like this before, and a part of me couldn't look away. It kept growing, far larger than I ever would have imagined. By the time it stopped, it must have been at least a foot long. The horse whinnied and tossed its head, which I interpreted as a positive reaction. Looking back, I realize how foolish and misguided my assumptions were, but in the moment, I was too caught up in my curiosity to think clearly. I squatted down to get a better look, noticing the horse's testicles for the first time. They were much larger than I expected, hanging low and heavy. Without thinking, I reached out to touch them too. They felt warm and alive, with a subtle movement inside that I couldn't quite explain. As I continued my exploration, I noticed a clear, thick fluid beginning to emerge from the tip of the horse's penis. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, sticky and shiny, almost like honey. The more I touched, the more of this fluid appeared, dripping down to form small puddles on the ground. In a moment of reckless curiosity, I decided to taste it. The flavor was surprisingly sweet, reminding me of apples. I know now how dangerous and inappropriate this was, but at the time, I was too caught up in the moment to consider the consequences of my actions. As I continued, more and more of the fluid emerged. It was too much for me to handle, and I found myself struggling to swallow it all. Some of it spilled from my lips, adding to the mess on the ground. The horse's genitals seemed to grow even larger, stretching my mouth uncomfortably. Suddenly, without warning, the horse began to ejaculate. The force of it took me by surprise, and I couldn't contain it all. It sprayed over my face and hair, leaving me soaked and sticky. In the midst of this chaos, I felt a rush of excitement and pleasure that I'm now deeply ashamed of. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't notice someone approaching until it was too late. To my horror, I looked up to see my husband, Jake, standing at the fence. His face was a mask of shock and disgust. "Sarah? What the hell are you doing?" His voice was filled with disbelief and anger. Reality came crashing down around me. I scrambled to my feet, trying desperately to wipe the mess from my face and clothes. "Jake, I can explain," I stammered, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew there was no explanation that could make this right. Jake's face contorted with rage and pain. "Explain? How can you possibly explain this?" he shouted. "I can't believe what I'm seeing. How could you do something like this?" I felt sick to my stomach. The full weight of what I'd done hit me all at once. "Please, Jake, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." It just happened. But Jake wasn't listening. He turned away, unable to even look at me. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said, his voice breaking. This is disgusting. I can't be around you right now." With that, he walked away, leaving me alone in the pasture. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by shame and regret. How could I have done this? How could I have betrayed Jake's trust in such a horrible way? I stayed there for what felt like hours, crying until I had no tears left. The horse stood nearby, oblivious to the pain and chaos it had inadvertently caused. As the sun began to set, I finally picked myself up and made my way home, dreading what would come next. The days that followed were a blur of arguments, tears, and painful silences. Jake moved out temporarily, saying he needed space to process what had happened. I threw myself into therapy, desperate to understand why I had acted so recklessly and determined to make sure it never happened again. Slowly, painfully, Jake and I began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were times when I thought we wouldn't make it, when the hurt and betrayal seemed too much to overcome. But we persevered, taking it one day at a time. I made a solemn promise to myself and to Jake that I would never do anything like that again. I avoided farms and pastures, turning away if I saw a horse in the distance. It was a constant reminder of my mistake, but also of my commitment to change. As weeks turned into months, I saw small signs of progress. Jake began to soften towards me, though the pain was still evident in his eyes. We started couples therapy, working through our issues together. It was hard, often painful work, but I was determined to prove to Jake that I could be the wife he deserved. One night, about 6 months after the incident, Jake took my hand as we sat on the couch. "Sarah," he said softly, "I want you to know that I'm trying to forgive you. It's not easy, and I'm still hurt, but I see how hard you're working to change. I think we can get through this." Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time they were tears of hope and gratitude. "Thank you, Jake," I whispered. "I promise I'll never let you down again." As I reflect on this journey, I'm struck by how close I came to losing everything. My moment of weakness nearly destroyed my marriage and my sense of self. But it also taught me valuable lessons about self-control, the importance of communication in a relationship, and the power of forgiveness. I know that the road ahead won't be easy. There will always be a part of Jake that remembers what happened, and I'll carry the weight of my actions for the rest of my life. But I'm committed to moving forward, to being a better person and a better wife. If there's one thing I want others to take from my story, it's this. No matter how curious you might be, no matter what impulses you might feel, always consider the consequences of your actions. The momentary thrill is never worth the pain and damage it can cause to yourself and those you love. As for me, I'm focused on the future. Jake and I are slowly rebuilding our trust and intimacy. We're talking about starting a family, something that seemed impossible in the dark days after my mistake. It's a sign of how far we've come, and it gives me hope for what lies ahead. I know now that true happiness doesn't come from fleeting moments of excitement or forbidden experiences. It comes from the deep, lasting bonds we form with the people we love. It comes from being true to ourselves and our values, even when temptation arises. My journey of healing and redemption is far from over, but I'm committed to seeing it through. Every day I work to be the best version of myself, to honor Jake's forgiveness, and to build a future filled with love, trust, and mutual respect. As I write this, I'm reminded of a quote I once read. "The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. I fell hard, but I'm rising again, stronger and wiser than before. And for that, despite all the pain and regret, I'm grateful." The journey of rebuilding trust is never a straight path. As weeks turned into months, Jake and I continued to work on our relationship, but there were still moments of tension and doubt. I could see the pain lingering in his eyes, a constant reminder of my terrible mistake. One evening, as we sat in our living room after a particularly difficult therapy session, Jake turned to me with a serious expression. "Sarah," he said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My heart raced, but I nodded. "Of course, Jake. Anything." He took a deep breath before continuing. "Have you ever done anything like that before? Or since? With any other animals?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew it was coming eventually, but it still hurt to hear it out loud. "No, Jake," I replied firmly, looking him directly in the eyes. "Never before, and absolutely never since." What happened that day was a horrible, one-time mistake that I will regret for the rest of my life. Jake held my gaze for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I believe you." Those 3 words meant more to me than I could express. It felt like a tiny crack in the wall of mistrust that had grown between us. As we continued to work on our relationship, I found myself reflecting more and more on what had led me to make such a terrible choice that day. In therapy, both individual and couples, we explored issues I hadn't even realized were there, feelings of boredom in our marriage, a desire for excitement that I'd been suppressing. and deep-seated insecurities that I'd never fully addressed. It wasn't easy to confront these parts of myself, but I knew it was necessary if we were ever going to move forward. Jake, for his part, was working through his own issues, feelings of inadequacy that my actions had intensified, and learning how to trust again after such a profound betrayal. Months passed and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. The silences between us grew less tense. We started to laugh together again, tentatively at first, then more freely. One night, as we were washing dishes together, a chore we'd always done as a team before everything fell apart, Jake flicked some soap suds at me playfully. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a huge step forward. However, just as things seemed to be improving, we hit another roadblock. Jake's brother was getting married, and the reception was to be held at a ranch. As soon as Jake told me, I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I don't know if I can go, I stammered, my hands shaking as I set down my coffee mug. Jake's face fell. Sarah, it's my brother's wedding. We have to go. But there might be horses there, I whispered, shame coloring my cheeks. The look on Jake's face was a mixture of pain and frustration. Do you really think you can't control yourself around horses now? His words stung, but I knew I deserved them. No, it's not that, I tried to explain. I'm afraid of how you'll feel, seeing me around them. I don't want to put you through that. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took my hand. Sarah, we can't avoid horses for the rest of our lives. At some point we have to face this. Maybe this is that point. I nodded, tears in my eyes. You're right. I'll go. I promise I won't let you down. The day of the wedding arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. As we drove to the ranch, I could feel the tension radiating from Jake. When we arrived, I saw the stables in the distance and felt my stomach lurch. But as the day went on, something unexpected happened. Being around the horses, seeing them from a distance, hearing their occasional neighs didn't fill me with temptation or shame. Instead, it reinforced my commitment to Jake and to our marriage. Every time I caught a glimpse of a horse, it reminded me of how much I had nearly lost and strengthened my resolve to never make such a mistake again. During the reception, Jake's eyes kept darting between me and the stables. Finally, as the sun was setting, he took my hand. Let's go for a walk, he said. My heart pounding, I followed him. We walked in silence until we reached the fence of the horse pasture. A beautiful bay horse was grazing nearby. Jake turned to me, his eyes searching my face. How do you feel right now? He asked quietly. I took a deep breath, considering my answer carefully. Grateful, I finally said. Grateful for you, for us, for this chance to make things right. That horse, it's beautiful, but that's all. What happened that day was a terrible mistake, one I'll never repeat. Being here now with you, this is all I want, all I'll ever want. Jake's eyes welled up with tears, and he pulled me into a tight embrace. We stood there for a long time, holding each other as the sun disappeared behind the hills. That day marked a turning point in our healing process. It didn't magically fix everything, we still had work to do, trust to rebuild, but it was a significant step forward. In the months that followed, Jake and I continued to work on our relationship. We made a point of being more open with each other, sharing our fears and insecurities instead of letting them fester. We also started to plan for our future again, something we hadn't done since before the incident. One evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset, Jake turned to me with a serious expression. Sarah, he said, I've been thinking. I think I'm ready to start trying for a baby. I felt my heart skip a beat. We had talked about having children before everything happened, but I had assumed that dream was lost. Are you sure? I asked, hardly daring to hope. Jake nodded, a small smile on his face, I'm sure. What happened? It was terrible, and it will always be a part of our story. But it's not our whole story. I love you, Sarah. I want to build a family with you. Tears of joy streamed down my face as I hugged him tightly. I love you too, Jake, so much. As I write this, I'm 6 months pregnant with our first child. Our journey has been far from easy, and I know we'll face more challenges in the future. But I'm no longer the person I was on that fateful day by the creek. I'm stronger now, more self-aware, and infinitely more grateful for the love and life I have. To anyone who might be tempted to give in to a momentary impulse, no matter how exciting it might seem, I urge you to stop and think. Consider the potential consequences not just for yourself, but for those you love. No fleeting thrill is worth the pain and heartache that can follow. And to those who might be struggling to forgive a partner who has made a terrible mistake, I can only say this forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to be vulnerable. But if both parties are committed to healing and growth, it is possible to rebuild trust and create a relationship that is stronger than before. As for me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I'm worthy of the forgiveness and trust Jake has given me. Every day, I choose to be faithful, honest, and loving. I choose our marriage, our future, our family. The mistakes of our past don't have to define us. They can, if we let them, become the catalyst for profound change and growth. My moment of weakness nearly cost me everything, but it also led me to become a better, stronger person. It taught me the true value of love, trust, and forgiveness. As I feel our baby kick inside me, I'm filled with hope for the future. Jake and I have weathered a storm that could have torn us apart, but instead it brought us closer together. We're not perfect, and our relationship isn't perfect, but it's real, it's honest, and it's built on a foundation of love and mutual respect that's been tested and proven strong. Our story isn't over. In many ways, it feels like it's just beginning, and I'm grateful for every moment, every challenge, every opportunity to show Jake and myself that love can truly conquer all.